Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Curating My Collection. I'm Carlo from All You Can Board, and today I'm going to be getting rid of 6 more games from my collection. Some of these were tough choices, others not so much. These days, because we have a YouTube channel and because I'm the type of person who likes to just explore what kind of games are out there, and sort of aside from Dylan, who I co-run the channel with, and my group of friends, Dylan and I tend to be the ones who kind of like buy the most games, so I'm always looking to try as many games as I can. I often buy games either knowing I'm going to eventually get rid of them or just thinking I might get rid of them, not really knowing, but I'm okay with that. Sort of think of it as a rental fee kind of thing. So I'm going to go through these one at a time here, starting with One Deck Dungeon. So this is designed by Chris Cheslick and published by Asmati Games, and this is a game I actually got from Dylan that he got rid of maybe about a year ago or so. I've played it a few times, and I think it's a really good game. There's a couple reasons I'm going to get to afterwards as to why I'm getting rid of it, but first I'm going to tell you a bit about it. So it's a game that plays for either 1 or 2 players. If you play it with 2 players, it's a cooperative. So it's basically a dice rolling game and dice allocation or dice placement game where you pick basically a character, a hero. There's like a mage, warrior, archer, and so on. And you're basically going to pick a mage, and you pick a boss, and you shuffle this deck of cards that are your dungeon cards. And in the dungeon, the cards will either be enemies or there'll be obstacles. There's like a force wall, or there's like locked doors and things like that. And basically, you're going to have 4 cards face down at the start, and on your turn, you're going to be always spending. There's a resource basically in the game that is called time, and every turn you start by spending 2 time. So your time is ticking as you go through this dungeon, and what that means is you discard 2 cards from the deck, and then you choose to either basically explore, like go into one of the 4 rooms that are face down, which are the face down cards, or you can re-enter a room that's already been opened. So let's say you flip over a card and you see it's an enemy, and you can either flee, or you can try to interact with it and fight it. And to fight it and defeat it, there's going to be certain colors and a number on there that might say like blue 5, or it might be 2 spots that say pink 10. And what that represents is there's different colored dice, and as you roll dice, you're trying to place dice of at least that number or higher to cover up the certain colors with those numbers to basically defeat those things. So as you go through, you're going to be able to, like, your heroes have stats like health and agility and all this kind of stuff, and you can get special abilities as you go on, and you're basically trying to get through 3 floors of this dungeon, and if you get to the end of the 3rd floor at the bottom, then there's a big boss that awaits you. It's a really difficult game, and it's one of those games, like, look at the size of this box, right? Like, it's very small, it's a very inexpensive game, and it's a real achievement in game design that it does so much with so little and has so much replay value in such a small box that you can play. There's, I think, 5 different heroes or characters in the base game. Again, you can play it cooperatively. There's also like a sort of a campaign mode where you can get stats, like you level up throughout the scenario, and if you make it out, then you can gain like talents that carry over, so you can play through a campaign. There's a bunch of different bosses in here. It's a really cool game. The reason why it is leaving my collection is that personally, I find that over time, I kept trying to give these kind of games a try, and I just found that over time, games where I'm playing solo, where I roll dice and just decide what to do with those dice, don't really appeal to me a whole lot. And as it is, like, I'm not crazy about cooperative games. Like, there's some cooperative games I like out there these days that do different things. Like, I always talk about The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9 on our channel. But typically, I'm usually not going to be the one in my game group to choose to play a cooperative game. So, and especially if I'm going to play a 2-player only game, there's so many other ones I would put ahead of this. So it's never really going to hit the table with 2 players. And even solo, I really enjoyed exploring the game, seeing what it has to offer. But it's one that I haven't really had the desire to come back to. And because it's been so long, I would probably have to reread the rules again, that kind of thing. I'm really glad I got to play it, and I have to give credit to, look at the cover of this game. First off, all the characters are women, and secondly, in board games and in video games and that kind of thing, a lot of the time the way they're dressed is like bikini tops and skimpy underwear and that kind of thing. And I was really impressed. This isn't like a brand new game where this kind of thing is becoming more popular to kind of like be more respectful and inclusive in games. And this was made 5 or 6 years ago, this game, and like they're just kind of like badass women warriors, and I love the what this kind of gets across. And I know the designer Chris Cheslick has mentioned stuff on his Twitter before about how sometimes people, email him and say, oh, how come your game only has female characters and all this kind of stuff, which is just a ridiculous complaint to have. Anyway, I won't get into it anymore, but One Deck Dungeon I think is a great game, and if you like those kind of games where you're kind of rolling dice and putting them places and trying to figure out what to do, it's a very tough, challenging game, and if you like it, there's a lot of replay value in the box. It's just not something that I want to come back to myself, but I'm very happy I got to play it. That is One Deck Dungeon. Next up on the list is a game that is fairly similar to One Deck Dungeon in a lot of ways. That is called Under Falling Skies. So this is designed by Thomas Ulir and published by CGE. So I believe this was originally a print and play game that won a design contest, and then CGE ended up making this full kind of published official version based on the design contest that this gentleman won. So I'm going to show you the back of the box here. This is kind of like Space Invaders, and it's similar when I say that One Deck Dungeon because it's another game where you roll dice and then you have to figure out where to place your dice and what to do with them. So the idea is there's an impending attack. You start off with these boards that you set up in a kind of variable setup way, and these spaceships here start at the top. And every turn you're going to roll your 5 dice. You have 3 gray dice and 2 white dice. You're going to roll all 5 dice, and then you're going to place them, as you can see, 1 die per column. So there's different spots on these boards, and even these boards you mix and match. So every time you play, it's going to be kind of a different setup. But the different rooms that you put them in represent, one might represent energy, which gives you energy to power up your blasters that are going to fire at these ships. Then there's another spot which is actually your gunner room, where you can fire at the ships that are coming down towards you. There's spots that have robots that give you new blue dice that get added that you can stick in rooms, and they stay there over time. And then there's also these green research spots which also require energy, which are these yellow symbols. And the way to win the scenario is to move your way up this research track, which has all these numbers. If you get to the top of the track, you beat the scenario. That's the only way to win. But you can lose because you're protecting a city. These ships are coming down on your city, and you have to defend it. If a ship hits your city, you lose a health, and you only have a certain number of health. So it does a lot of cool stuff. And the one thing I want to mention about the dice, not only does it have the whole thing with the columns and moving dice, but I mentioned there's gray dice and white dice. When you start placing a die, it activates right away, and let's say you place your gray dice. As soon as you place a white die, all the dice that you haven't placed yet, you get to re-roll. So there's even this interesting aspect where if you roll 5 dice and you don't like what you get, you can place one of your white dice first to re-roll the other ones to kind of mitigate a bit of that randomness, change up your odds. It's very puzzly because the other thing is usually the higher value of the die, like a 5 and a 6 is usually going to do more for you. It's going to get you more energy, or it's going to shoot down more ships or that sort of thing. But the higher value die that you place, the more spaces towards your city that these ships descend. So you always trying to weigh the positive and negative of yeah, I can put this 6 here, but then this ship's going to move 6 spaces. It's going to get really close to my city. But sometimes you need to get that 6 because you need that much research, or you need that much energy. So it's a game that has a lot of difficult decisions, and is another one that I'm really glad I got to play. By the way, I should mention, this is a solo-only game. Just came out this past year. I played through it quite a bit. I've played at least 5-6 hours, 7-8 hours of this game. Really enjoyed my time with it. But once I got to that point, and there's even a campaign in here where you get to play as characters and you can kind of have these branching paths that you go on. I think it's a very well-designed game, but again, for me, I don't want to just sit there rolling dice figuring out where they go all day, so I'm glad I got to play it, but it's not something I'm going to gravitate back towards again, so it will be leaving my collection. But if you like solo games that have a lot of dice rolling and figuring out what to do with the dice, Under Falling Skies might be a really good option for you. Okay, next up is Super Skill Pinball 4K'd. So this is designed by Jeff Engelstein and published by WizKids. So this is basically a pinball roll and write game. It's for 1 to 4 players, and I'm going to show you on the back here. You basically have, it plays about half an hour. You basically have 4 different types of pinball machines, or pins they just call them, that you can play. And you basically have 2 little boards. One is the pinball thing itself, and the other one is basically your score sheet where you're marking your points. All you do is you basically roll a die or 2 dice, and you basically pick one of the values, and you write in on your board. There's going to be numbers with dice, and you're basically going to color in a spot, and then usually it'll score you points, or it's basically going to work like a pinball machine. So I have to say, this game sits in a weird spot for me because I think it's a really, it's quite an achievement in terms of game design. It feels like, I think I mentioned this in my 30 mini reviews of 2020 where I talked about this game really quick, where this kind of feels like a game where someone dared someone to design oh, I bet you can't do a roll and write pinball game. How crazy would that be? And then Jeff Engelstein was just oh yeah, watch me. And I feel like he did such a good job with the way it's designed. Like, I don't have a lot of complaints about the game in terms of like what I think could have been done better or anything like that. Like, it totally simulates the feeling of pinball as well as I think a tabletop roll and write experience could. And I've enjoyed exploring it. I've only actually played one of the 4 pins, which I'm a little bit ashamed to say that I'm getting rid of it without having tried the other ones, but I haven't felt that pull to go back to it, and there's a couple reasons. So I mentioned it plays 1 to 4 players. I'm never going to want to play this game with more than, like, with 2 or more. I played it once with Dylan, and it felt kind of weird because you're rolling dice and there's no real interaction with the other player other than comparing your score. And let's say the other person has, like, they lose all 3 of their balls go down the drain or whatever and they're out, then they just watch you play. So there's a bit of, like, there's the player elimination aspect, or at the end of a round you're just kind of waiting for the other person to do stuff, but you basically roll the dice and then everyone looks at the dice and picks one of the numbers, and then you're just kind of like, you're all playing your own little game. And then the other thing is, because you have your score sheet, every time it's like, okay, you roll dice, you color in the spot, you score a point, you have to go mark your 1 point on your sheet. Then you roll dice, you do this thing, and then you mark your point on your sheet. It just feels like a lot of the game is spent rolling the dice and then marking things on your sheet, when I would rather spend more time figuring out my puzzle than kind of like the, what do you want to call it, like the maintenance of the game, maintaining the game at the state of the game. And then when you fill up your 100 points, you erase everything and mark this 100-point column. So it moves a lot slower than a pinball game actually would. It doesn't capture the frantic, real-time pace of pinball, which, like, I'm not surprised. It is a roll and write game. So again, I think it does an awesome job with what it sets out to do. If you really like roll and write games and you just want to explore what's out there, or especially if you are a fan of pinball, if you grew up playing a lot of pinball games, this might be right up your alley. I'm really glad I got to check it out because, again, I'm the type of person I just want to explore, see what's out there in the gaming world, and I'm really happy I got to play it. And I know the other thing I should mention is the value for this is, like, off the charts. Like, this is like a $25 or $30 game. If you like pinball, it's basically infinite replayable. It's just beat your high score. Keep trying to beat your high score over and over and over, and you can just replay this forever. It's a lot of game in a very small box, and it's impressive how well it captures that kind of aspect of pinball, but it's not something I want to go back to myself, so it will be leaving my collection. That is Super Skill Pinball 4K. Alright, next up is Unmatched Cobble Fog. This is, I believe it's co-designed by Rob Davio and Justin Jacobson, if I'm not mistaken, and it's published by Restoration Games and Mondo Games. This is a game for 2 to 4 players. I think it works by far best with 2. If you play with 3 or 4, you're either one of the players or both players are basically playing with 2 characters. But the basic idea is, so you can see on the box there is the Invisible Man, Sherlock and Watson, Jekyll and Hyde, and Dracula. So Unmatched is a series of games. There's a bunch of other ones. There's Unmatched, like Battle of Legends Volume 1 and 2. There's Volume 3 coming out. There's sets that come with, like, Bruce Lee and Robin Hood and Bigfoot. There's a set that comes with Deadpool. So you can buy different sets and kind of mix and match all the content. Some of them come with different maps as well as the characters. The idea is you get a unique deck of cards that applies to that character, and you're moving along a map like this trying to defeat the other characters. So you have a health, and sometimes you have, again, in the case of like Sherlock and Holmes, for example, you have your main hero and then you have your sidekick, or your character and your sidekick, and they'll each have a health. And you have cards that you play, you have a deck of cards that you're going through, and you're playing cards to kind of move around and do attacks and play schemes that kind of... I have to say what impressed me most about the game is how thematic it felt and how, like, well integrated the characters all felt. So, like, playing as Sherlock and Watson, for example, just felt amazingly thematic. The kind of cool stuff that they do, it really impressed me with how well it felt like I was actually controlling those characters and they were unique. And when you run out of your deck of cards, you're basically exhausted. So I see this being the type of game, the reason why this is leaving my collection, I enjoyed it, I didn't love it. I'm more impressed with it than I actually enjoyed playing it, but the thing is, this strikes me as the type of game you want to play over and over with the same person or people, because let's say I play this 10 times and I go introduced to someone new, I'm going to know my character, I'm going to know the other characters super well. It kind of reminds me of like something like chess or Hive, where the more experienced player is probably going to crush the other player. This is something that has a very high skill ceiling. I can see this being, having like a competitive scene. I can see there being like a tournament scene. There probably already is for this game. So if I didn't have a bunch of other 2-player only games in my collection, or if I wanted to play it more at higher player counts, it might stick around. I might want to explore it. But the other thing is, because there's only 2 maps and 4 characters, if I was going to play it more, then I would invest more heavily and go right into the Unmatched series and buy a bunch of the other games to have more characters and more maps to play as. but that involves also more shelf space and then having another dedicated player to play with over time. So it almost feels like an all or nothing kind of game. I am really glad I got to try it out. It's the only game in the Unmatched series that I've tried it out. And if, you know, one of my friends ends up buying this off me or whatnot, like, I'll happily play this any day. It's just one that I haven't felt that kind of need to go back to since I last played it. And ultimately, you know, I have another 2-player game in my collection that's also from 2020 called Undaunted North Africa, which is a similar kind of style of like 2-player duel game where you each have a different faction, and that one is like calling to me to go back to more, and I'm going to explore that as well as a bunch of other 2-player games. So this just is a victim of kind of like it being mostly best with 2 players, and there's too many other games in my collection that I want to play ahead of it, so it will be leaving, but it's a really impressive design. That's Unmatched Cobble Fog. All right, next up, we've got a big one here called Kingdom Rush Rift in Time. This is co-designed by Helena Hope, Jesse Wright, and Senfuang Lim, and it's published by Lucky Duck Games. So you might be familiar with the Kingdom Rush video games or the mobile apps. I never actually played them. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, and I'll be honest, I got this game mostly for the solo mode. So reading about how it played, it's cooperative, and reading how it played with 2 to 4 players, it didn't like appeal to me a whole lot. I thought it was going to play best as a solo mode, and as a new dad, I thought this is going to be a great thing to just kind of have set up in the game room, be able to come back to whenever I want. It's basically a series of scenarios, and it is, I think there's 10 or 11 scenarios in the base game. You pick a hero, you set up based on how the rulebook tells you how to set up for the scenario. And you basically play through, and it's basically a spatial puzzle with a bunch of timing. So there's hordes of enemies that come out on these trays that come towards your gate of your base, and you're trying to defend. So it's like a tower defense thing where you're using your characters to do damage. Some of them have spells, or they're melee characters that just like, you know, punch or throw things on the ground that do damage. But it's basically all the damage tiles, as you can see kind of here and here and stuff, and on some of the boards is like it's like polyomino, like the Tetris shaped pieces. Some of them are just a little square, other ones are like L shaped or whatever, and you're basically, the rounds play out where you're building towers and doing damage by placing these different shape and size of pieces to cover up the configuration of enemies that are on these cards. And if these cards get to your base, for every enemy that's revealed, they do damage to you, and if you take a certain amount of damage, you lose. So I thought I was going to like this a lot more than I did. I got to be honest, it really missed the mark for me. I didn't really enjoy it all that much. I was pretty disappointed. I don't know why I expected to like it a lot more. The game is like, it has a really nice production value. It's a massive box. There's a lot of value in here. If you get a chance to, like, let's say try this at a friend's place, or you try it online, I don't know if there's even a version on Tabletop Simulator or Tabletopia. If it's something you like, it's absolutely worth the price point. Like, I think it was a $45 or $50 game, and there's a lot of game in this box, but it's the biggest or second biggest box on my shelf. Is taking up a lot of space, and the setup and teardown time is part of what did it for me, because to set it up and play through just one scenario, whether you win or, like, if you lose 10 or 15 minutes in, you're probably going to want to reset it up, and even like setting up the scenario again takes a while, or to play over the same scenario again doesn't feel like there's a lot of, I just didn't feel interested in doing the same scenario over when I lost. It felt like, oh, I just have to slightly, like, do a little bit better. Like, the mistakes are really punishing, but it doesn't feel that interesting or thematic. Like, there's this weird thing where when you put down towers, they, at the end of the turn, the towers come back to your hand. So, like, I don't know if that's something to do with the way the video game or the mobile app works, but it just kind of felt weird. Like, why is the tower leaving and coming back to my hand, and then I have to redeploy it the next round? But if you don't play the towers, then they upgrade. So it's like an interesting trade-off, but like thematically it felt kind of weird. And then even the way that the tiles go out in like the spatial puzzle, like if I'm going to play a polyomino game, if I'm going to play a spatial puzzle, I play those games, most of those games that I like play in 45 minutes to an hour, some of them play in half an hour. The idea of playing multiple scenarios over and over that have such a high, like, basically no room for error, very little room for error, that are so punishing. To play a spatial puzzle like that over and over and over, there's certain things it introduces, different types of enemies, you know, you get different special abilities. Like, if you like this game, there's a lot in the box to bring you back, but for me, this was one of my disappointments from 2020, that it just really was not the game for me. I don't know what I was expecting or why I was expecting it to be different. Maybe it was the fact that I like polyomino games or whatnot, but yeah, this is one that I played through 3 scenarios, I believe, and I have no desire to go back to it, if I'm being completely honest, so it will be leaving my collection. I gotta say real quick, there is Kingdom Rush Elemental Uprising, which is going to be released in 2022, and apparently addresses some of the issues. that people had with the base or with this initial game. There's also expansions you can get for this and stuff. You might like it. The rules are kind of tough to get into. The rulebook I think could have been laid out a bit better. I don't know. Just didn't really do it for me. That's Kingdom Rush. And the last game that I'll be getting rid of, which is probably the one I've enjoyed most of all the games here, is Beyond the Sun. This is designed by Dennis K. Chan. It was his debut design and published by Rio Grande Games. So this is 2 to 4 players. It says on the box plays in about 100 minutes. Have a how to play video for this on the channel. And before I forget, I'm going to say right now, if this game was not on Board Game Arena, I probably wouldn't be getting rid of it yet, because it's one that I'm happy to play a couple more times at least, but because I can just go play it on Board Game Arena and it saves me all the setup time and whatever, I'll probably just try it out 1 or 2 more times on there if I really want to play it, and highly recommend you check it out if this interests you at all. The basic idea is that, I was going to flip this over, but this is upside down. The basic idea is it is a worker placement game with an evolving tech tree or technology tree. So you have this big board with these spots you can go to off the bat, and then as the game goes on, these initial level 1 spaces, and over the course of the game, you're going to be able to research new spaces that are going to, you're going to look at a few cards and choose which one's going to go there. So the board of possible action spaces is going to change every game depending on which cards you research and in which order. And when you're the one who researches there, you're the only one who can then gain access to that spot, but other players can kind of follow you and go there. So players might want to go a completely different direction strategically than you. They might want to follow you, but they're going to have to be playing catch up. So it's kind of thematic in that sense. You're going into space and seeing what's out there, and nobody wants to really take that risk yet, but once they see if you have something that you found something that they like, they might follow you over there. It's got the worker placement board itself feels unnecessarily big. It's massive. This game is a big table hog. Everyone also has their own little player boards, and then there's also it's called the space board or the systems board, which is where you can kind of colonize stuff, where you're playing almost an area control game or an area majority game, where you have spaceships that can move around and gain control of different systems, and then you can colonize them to get points. And there's basically certain achievements that are present throughout the game, where once a certain number of achievements have been kind of, I guess, achieved by the players, it triggers the end game. I wasn't crazy about the kind of art style, the way the game looks. It's very simplistic. There's something about the game that just felt like it's a weird game for me, because I enjoyed it when I played it, but there was something about it that felt a little dry, and the rules are pretty heavy. Like, it takes a good minimum 15-20 minutes to teach it to other people probably, and it's been a few months now since I've played it, and the idea even of, like, I did a how to play video for this too. I've played it a couple times. I've already forgotten some of the rules. The idea of relearning it to then teach it to certain people, to play it, like, I wouldn't want to just play it just once. The amount of, like, effort and time to get it to the table just once isn't worth it, really, in my opinion. But I also don't like it enough to want to have it be a regular game that we play at game night over and over. And usually when I teach people a game that takes this long, they kind of want to play it a few times to see what it has to offer. And having it on my shelf is just like, it's begging for people to be like, what's that game? Beyond the Sun, I really want to try that. And I just, for a game that's going to take minimum 1.5 hours to 2 hours kind of thing, with a heavier teach, there's just so many other games on my shelf that I would rather play ahead of it, that I don't really want it there taking up space and having people pick this over other worker placement games that I have. So I've enjoyed my time with it. It's a very impressive design, especially from a debut designer, and this, even just having tried this, makes me want to play any game that Dennis K. Chan is going to design in the future, because for a debut game, this was one of the more impressive debuts I've ever played. But again, because it's on Board Game Arena, and because I've already forgotten a good chunk of the rules, it's just one that doesn't really, speak to me in terms of something I really want to come back to. So that is the last one on my list, Beyond the Sun. So those are the 6 games I'm getting rid of this time. I'm curious to hear what you think. Have you tried any of these games? Do you disagree with my opinion on them? Are these games that are going to last in your collection? Are these games you had your eye on? Always curious to hear what you guys think of these picks and why I'm getting rid of them and that sort of thing. And hopefully I'll have another one of these videos probably within the next few months. There were a bunch of other games that were I was on the cusp of getting rid of, but thought, maybe not yet. Some of them I still want to play a bit more, but if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Otherwise, that's it for this video, so thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.